12,000 years ago, long before the pyramids, before Sumer's first temple stones, something extraordinary may have already risen and vanished beneath the waves of India's western coast. Sonar scans show vast geometric grids buried under the Arabian Sea. Streets, walls, entire city blocks, older than anything known in Mesopotamia. Ancient texts speak of a river that no longer flows, of a city of gods swallowed by the ocean, of weapons brighter than 1,000 suns. What if these weren't myths at all? What if the true cradle of civilization lay not between the Tigris and Euphrates, but here, beneath India's forgotten shores? Tonight we dive into the silence of the deep, to follow the lost river Saraswati, to walk through the drowned city of Dwarka, and to listen to the whispers of the Indus seals that no one has yet deciphered. Somewhere in that darkness may lie the first heartbeat of humanity's story. Beneath the restless waters of India's western coast, there is a silence that feels alive. If you could drift just beneath the surface, past the thin skin of sunlight and into the cold haze below, you'd begin to see shapes that shouldn't exist in nature. Lines that run too straight, angles too precise, outlines that seem to remember purpose. It is here, in the Gulf of Cambay, also known as the Gulf of Kambat, that scientists caught the first glimpse of something that could rewrite human history. In the winter of 2001, a research team from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology set out to map the seafloor near Gujarat. Their vessel, the Sagar Paskimi, was equipped with advanced side-scan sonar, technology capable of sending acoustic pulses deep into the ocean and reflecting back high-resolution images of what lies beneath. The goal was simple: to study marine pollution. But as the sonar readouts flickered across the monitor, the scientists saw something no one expected. Stretching for nearly 9 kilometers across the seabed was a pattern of geometric regularity. A grid of long linear features intersecting at right angles, some forming what looked like the outline of streets and large rectangular foundations. Natural formations like sand ridges or coral reefs don't align so perfectly. The sonar was, unmistakably, capturing something organized. As word spread, the site was dubbed a possible lost city. The oceanographic team lowered dredges to collect samples from the seafloor. What they pulled up stunned them. Artifacts that looked unmistakably man-made. Fragments of pottery fired in kilns, beads of semi-precious stone, and tools shaped by human hands. Some were carbon-dated at laboratories in India and the UK. The preliminary results pointed to astonishing ages, around 9,000 years before present, or roughly 7,000 BCE. If accurate, that would make the site thousands of years older than the Sumerian cities of Uruk and Eridu, long considered the birthplace of civilization, even older than Egypt's first dynasties or the earliest Neolithic towns of Anatolia. It would push back the dawn of organized life by nearly 5 millennia. The possibility electrified some scholars and enraged others. Could an advanced civilization really have existed on India's coasts at a time when the rest of the world was still building with mud and thatch? Skeptics urged caution. The Gulf of Cambay is a challenging environment. The water is thick with sediment, visibility near zero, the tides fierce. It's a place where sonar images can easily distort, where erosion can play tricks on the eye. Some geologists argued that the grid-like shapes were merely the result of natural sediment patterns, or paleochannels, ancient riverbeds buried and later re-exposed by shifting currents. But others pointed out that the artifacts recovered from those same depths could not be explained away so easily. The pottery had been fired at high temperatures, a process far beyond the technology of hunter-gatherers. Stone tools found nearby were carefully flaked, showing the hand of skilled craftsmen. A piece of fossilized wood retrieved from 36 meters below the surface was carbon dated to about 7,500 BCE, suggesting that a dense forest, and perhaps human settlement once stood where the sea now rolls. To understand how this could be possible, scientists turned to geology. At the end of the last ice age, global sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. Much of the Arabian Sea's continental shelf was dry land, a vast coastal plain fed by rivers that have since vanished. As the glaciers melted and oceans swelled, these low-lying regions were gradually inundated. Any settlements that once stood there would have been swallowed whole, their traces entombed beneath sand and silt. This is not unique to India. Similar underwater landscapes have been found off the coasts of Japan, Malta, and the Bahamas, but fewer as extensive or as suggestive as those off Gujarat. The Gulf of Cambay site lies near the mouths of two now-defunct rivers, the Sabarmati and the mythical Saraswati, making it a natural cradle for ancient life. Where fresh water met salt, early societies often flourished, fishing, farming, and trading along the edges of the sea. For archaeologists, the implications are staggering. If the sonar images truly capture the remains of a city, it would mean that complex urban planning, streets, drainage, architecture, existed thousands of years before Mesopotamia's earliest ziggurats. It would mean that India was not a late participant in civilization's rise, but one of its earliest architects. And yet, because the site lies under nearly 40 meters of turbulent water, full-scale excavation remains nearly impossible. Visibility is so poor that divers can see no farther than an arm's length. Every expedition brings up more questions than answers. Could erosion have jumbled the layers and misled carbon dating? Were the artifacts washed there from elsewhere by ancient river floods? Until advanced submersible robotics or sediment coring can be deployed, the truth will remain suspended, like the silt that clouds the Gulf itself. Still, the evidence continues to grow. In 2003, marine archaeologists discovered additional structures off the coast near Dwarka, showing similar alignments: walls, plinths, and steps carved in stone, lying at depths of 10 to 20 meters. These match descriptions of submerged cities in India's ancient epics, suggesting that coastal civilizations may have existed continuously along this region for thousands of years, their remains scattered beneath the waves as the ocean advanced. If we step back and connect these clues, sonar grids, carbon-dated wood, river paleo channels, and underwater architecture, a picture begins to form. Not a myth, but a civilization erased by rising seas. Its people may have watched the tides claim their temples, retreated inland, and passed their memories into oral tradition. Memories that later became the story of Manu's flood, the deluge that remade the world. What is most striking is how the scientific and the mythical seem to meet in this one place. The sonar beam and the ancient verse point to the same truth, that the ocean off India's coast hides a forgotten chapter of human history. The question is not whether the ruins are real, for the evidence of human presence is clear, but whether we are ready to see civilization itself as older and more complex than our textbooks allow. The Gulf of Cambay, then, is more than a site. It is a mirror reflecting a version of the human story in which India is not the student of Mesopotamia, but its elder. And if those submerged foundations truly belong to an organized city, then the first spark of civilization may have flickered not between two rivers in Iraq, but beneath the waters of Gujarat, a city lost, yet not entirely gone. If you fly today over the deserts of northwestern India, over the barren plains of Rajasthan and Haryana, you can trace a pale ribbon stretching like a scar through the land. A dry channel of sand and salt that once shimmered blue with water. Thousands of years ago, this was not desert. It was a river vast enough to rival the Nile or the Indus, a river sung by poets and worshipped as a goddess, the Saraswati. Ancient hymns in the Rig Veda call her "She who flows from the mountains to the sea, mother of rivers, mighty among the mighty." For centuries, this river was believed to be a myth, a symbol of divine purity, not a body of water. But then, satellites began to see what the human eye could not. In the late 20th century, Indian geologists and remote sensing scientists began examining images from Landsat and IRS satellites. Across hundreds of kilometers, they found faint traces of a dried river system, a buried channel running roughly parallel to the modern Indus. The path began in the foothills of the Himalayas, curved through the plains of Haryana and Rajasthan, and ended in the Rann of Kutch near the Arabian Sea. The satellite images matched almost perfectly with the locations of dozens of archaeological sites belonging to the Indus-Saraswati civilization. It was as if the lost river had left behind a necklace of ruined towns marking where it once flowed. Further proof came from the ground itself. Scientists drilled deep cores along the supposed riverbed, extracting layers of sediment and fossilized shells. Beneath the desert crust, they found fine-grained fluvial sand, rounded pebbles, and traces of freshwater organisms. Unmistakable evidence that a mighty river once coursed through this now arid land. In some wells, villagers still draw sweet water from buried aquifers that follow the same path. Beneath the Thar Desert, the Saraswati still whispers underground. According to geological and archaeological data, the river flowed strongly between roughly 8,000 and 4,000 BCE. Its headwaters likely formed from the Sutlej and Yamuna rivers, which at the time joined to create a single, massive stream descending from the Himalayas. Over thousands of years, tectonic shifts along the Aravalli range altered their courses. The Sutlej turned west toward the Indus, and the Yamuna east toward the Ganges. Cut off from its sources, the Saraswati gradually dried. By around 1900 BCE, satellite images show its channel fading into a chain of seasonal streams and salt flats. The human story followed the same pattern. Along its banks once stood hundreds of settlements: Kalibangan, Banawali, Rakigarhi, thriving towns that predated or paralleled the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo Daro. Excavations reveal baked brick houses, paved streets, and carefully planned drainage systems, mirroring the sophistication of the Indus cities farther west. In Kalibangan, archaeologists found an ancient ploughed field, perhaps the oldest ever discovered, with furrows laid at right angles, evidence of organised agriculture as early as 2800 BCE. The people here domesticated barley and wheat, crafted terracotta figurines, and traded beads of carnelian and lapis with distant lands. The Saraswati nourished them all. When the river began to shrink, the civilization shifted. Wells grew brackish, farmlands turned to dust, and cities were slowly abandoned. Many of the Saraswati's people migrated eastward toward the Ganges basin, carrying their rituals, their symbols, and their language. Some scholars believe this migration gave rise to the Vedic culture described in the hymns, a poetic memory of a river that once defined their world. The Rig Veda, likely composed around 1500 to 1200 BCE, remembers Saraswati not as myth, but as a living force. Pure in her course, swift as thought, great among rivers. That reverence may have been nostalgia for a homeland already lost. Modern science has continued to trace her ghost. Aerial radar imaging by the Indian Space Research Organisation and Geological Survey of India in the early 2000s confirmed the presence of a vast paleo river system, over 4 to 6 kilometres wide in places. The alignment of this buried channel passes beneath some of the oldest Harappan sites, suggesting that the Saraswati's floodplains were indeed the cradle where early Indian civilization first took shape. Today, the ancient course is sometimes called the Gagga-Hakra River, as small seasonal streams in India and Pakistan still follow fragments of the original path. Hydrologists have even traced isotopic signatures of glacial meltwater, proof that this was once a Himalayan-fed river, not a desert stream. When glaciers melted at the end of the Ice Age, the Saraswati would have surged with power, sustaining agriculture and trade across an immense fertile corridor. But as rainfall patterns shifted and tectonic faults diverted its tributaries, the river began its long retreat. In a sense, the fall of the Saraswati was the first climate catastrophe to erase a civilization. Culturally, her disappearance transformed India's spiritual geography. In later Hindu tradition, the river was said to flow invisibly, joining the Ganges and Yamuna at the sacred confluence of Prayagraj, a symbolic reunion of what geology had separated. Even today, millions gather at the Kumbh Mela festival to bathe in those waters, believing that the invisible Saraswati still flows beneath them. Science calls it groundwater, faith calls it memory. The rediscovery of the Saraswati has also reframed how we view the chronology of civilization. The region she once watered, stretching from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, contains over 1,000 known archaeological sites, more than along the Indus itself. If civilization rose first where life was most abundant, then this lost river valley, not Mesopotamia, may have been humanity's earliest continuous centre of urban culture. Somewhere beneath the desert winds, the river may still flow underground, unseen but enduring, a quiet pulse echoing the first heartbeat of civilization itself. And as we follow that invisible current southward, we arrive at the brick-lined streets of Harappa and Mohenjo Daro, the next chapter in this buried story of order, vision, and silence. If stories like this river's forgotten course speak to you, leave a like, to help this story reach more eyes, and subscribe, so you can walk with us through the next vanished world where brick and time still whisper the same ancient rhythm. At the edge of the Indus plain, where dust turns to clay and the air hums with heat, stand the remains of cities so precisely built that even today they seem to whisper of forgotten engineers. Streets aligned to true north, drains running beneath brick-paved lanes, wells set at exact intervals. This was no primitive settlement. This was design, deliberate and calm, carved from reason rather than chaos. To walk through Harappa or Mohenjo Daro, even in ruin, is to feel the mind of a civilization that understood order as a sacred principle. The first site to reveal its secret was Harappa, discovered in the 1920s when workers for the British Raj were quarrying bricks to build a railway. What they found were not scattered remnants, but entire walls, drains, and foundations aligned with mathematical precision. Soon after, another city appeared farther south, Mohenjo Daro, meaning Mound of the Dead. Together they rewrote the understanding of prehistory. Where scholars once thought early urbanism belonged to Sumer alone, here was proof that another cradle had bloomed in the Indus basin, one that rivaled it in sophistication and scale. Archaeologists excavating Harappa uncovered something astonishing. Every brick was of standard size, 1.2.4 ratio, a hallmark of centralized planning. Streets ran north to south and east to west, creating a grid pattern reminiscent of modern cities. Houses were 2 or 3 stories high, made of kiln-fired brick rather than mud. Many had private wells, inner courtyards, and bathing rooms with carefully sloped floors to drain wastewater. These drains connected beneath the streets to covered sewer lines, the world's first known public sanitation system. Even in ruins, you can trace the elegance of their logic, hygiene as harmony, order as a way of life. At Mohenjo Daro, the layout grew even more remarkable. The city divided into 2 sectors, the citadel on higher ground and the lower town below. In the citadel stood one of archaeology's great enigmas, the Great Bath, a massive watertight pool built with baked bricks and bitumen, accessible by stairways on either side. Around it were small chambers, perhaps for changing or ritual preparation. No temples or palaces overshadowed it, suggesting that spiritual purification, not royal power, lay at the city's heart. Water again was central, both sacred and practical. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Indus cities show no evidence of kings, armies, or monumental tombs. No inscriptions proclaim a ruler's glory. No statues bear individual names. Yet everything functions with astonishing unity. The economy was organized enough to support specialized crafts, bead-making workshops, copper smelters, and warehouses filled with standardized weights and measures. The smallest Harappan weight, about 13.5 grams, matches a binary progression system, proof of a mathematical culture that valued consistency over ostentation. The city's planning extended even to airflow. Streets were oriented to capture prevailing winds, cooling homes in the harsh summer heat. Drain covers allowed inspection and cleaning, an understanding of civic maintenance unmatched until Rome, 2,000 years later. Everywhere, design served both body and spirit, the visible and the invisible. In museums today, Harappan artifacts tell of a people both practical and poetic. There are terracotta figurines of dancers, bulls, and mother goddesses, symbols of fertility and rhythm. There are tiny faience beads and shell bangles traded as far as Mesopotamia. Seals carved from steatite bear images of sacred animals, elephants, tigers, unicorn-like bulls, above rows of tiny symbols. That script remains undeciphered, but its presence shows literacy, perhaps even record-keeping. Mesopotamian tablets mention traders from a distant land called Meluha, most likely the Indus region, bringing timber, ivory, and precious stones across the Arabian Sea. The Harappans were not isolated. They were part of the world's first interconnected economy. Yet despite their complexity, these cities appear almost egalitarian. No palaces or fortresses dominate the landscape. Instead of the vertical hierarchy seen in Mesopotamia, Harappan culture seems horizontal, a network of citizens bound by shared design and mutual order. It suggests a society guided less by kings than by collective understanding, perhaps governed by councils or by custom and ritual rather than conquest. The precision of their architecture reveals a mind attuned to measurement, and measurement, in any age, is the language of civilization. From brick ratios to street grids, from water flow to weights of trade, the Harappans lived within a geometry of balance. Even their motifs reflect symmetry. The famous Pashupati seal, showing a horned figure seated cross-legged surrounded by animals, echoes later images of Lord Shiva, a continuity of symbolism that may span thousands of years. It hints that the philosophical seeds of later Indian thought, meditation, order, cyclic harmony, were already present in these ancient cities. What remains most mysterious is how such a vast civilization, spanning over 800,000 square kilometers and encompassing more than 1,000 settlements, could maintain unity without centralized rule. Perhaps the secret lay in trade networks and shared cultural codes, anchored by rivers like the Indus and Saraswati. As long as water flowed, order prevailed. When those waters failed, the silence began. Excavations reveal that around 1900 BCE, both Harappa and Mohenjo Daro entered decline. Signs of flooding alternate with evidence of drought, layers of silt, abandoned houses, and unburied skeletons. The once steady rhythm of civic life broke apart. Some scholars blame the shifting of rivers, others suggest climate change, disease, or gradual depopulation. Whatever the cause, the grid loosened, the drains clogged, and the Great Bath fell dry. But the memory of order did not vanish. It folded into India's later traditions of sacred architecture, from temple symmetry to urban planning based on Vastu Shastra, the science of space. To walk through these ruins today is to step into a blueprint of humanity's potential, a civilization that built without kings, ruled without conquest, and measured progress not by monuments but by balance. Harappa and Mohenjo Daro remind us that the first great experiment in civilization may have been not about power, but about harmony. an ancient promise written in brick, still visible beneath the dust. And when we listen to the wind over those bricks, we might hear what their silence is trying to tell us, that beneath every empire's ambition lies the quiet memory of a people who once built for order, not for glory. But even order cannot escape time. As rivers began to shift and cities fell to silence, new stories would emerge. Stories of floods and gods, of survival and memory. Myths that carried the truth of what had been lost. Long before written history, when the ice still clung to the roof of the world and the oceans were hundreds of feet lower, something happened that the earth has never forgotten. The seas began to rise, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed. Whole coastlines vanished, forests drowned, and the world's climate shifted forever. Scientists call it the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, the period known to geologists as the Younger Dryas termination. But to ancient peoples who lived through it, it wasn't a climate event. It was the end of the world. In India, that cataclysm survives not in fossils or sediment, but in story, the flood of Manu. It begins simply. A man washing his hands in a river finds a tiny fish that speaks. The fish warns him of a coming flood that will destroy everything and asks for protection. Manu raises it, releasing it into larger waters as it grows. One day, the fish, now vast as the ocean, tells Manu to build a great boat, to gather the seeds of all life and to await the deluge. When the waters rise, the fish returns, towing the vessel through the endless flood to a mountaintop. When the waters recede, Manu steps onto dry land and begins the human story again. To most, this tale sounds like allegory, a myth of rebirth and virtue. But modern geology gives it an uncanny realism. Around 10,000 BCE, the last great glacial melt triggered Meltwater Pulse 1b, a rapid sea level rise that swallowed tens of thousands of square kilometres of coastal plains. In India, the Arabian Sea surged inland, drowning the lowlands of Gujarat and Maharashtra. The Bay of Bengal rose over the deltas of Tamil Nadu and Odisha. The shoreline retreated more than 100 kilometres, erasing entire landscapes. Any settlements that once stood there, villages, shrines, trading posts, vanished beneath the tide. If early humans witnessed this, they would have remembered it as the flood to end all floods. Across the world, other cultures kept the same memory. The Sumerians told of Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by the gods and was granted immortality. The Hebrews remembered Noah and his ark. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha floating on a wooden chest after Zeus cleansed the earth. In Mesoamerica, the Maya Popol Vuh describes earlier worlds destroyed by water. These stories, separated by oceans, converge on the same event, the global floods that accompanied the end of the Ice Age. They are not coincidences. They are fragments of a shared human trauma, encoded in the only medium that could carry memory across millennia: myth. In India, the story of Manu has layers older than the Vedas. The text Shatapatha Brahmana records the earliest version, where the fish guides Manu's boat to the Himalayas, anchoring it to a mountain, Naubandhana, the place where the ship was tied. Some scholars identify this with the peaks of the Himalayas or the Aravalli Range. Geological surveys reveal that these highlands indeed bear evidence of ancient lakes and flood deposits. The myth and the landscape still echo each other. Modern climatologists reconstruct the same scene through science. Ice cores from Greenland show a dramatic warming event around 11,600 years ago, causing the sudden collapse of ice sheets. Global temperatures rose by 7 degrees Celsius in just a few centuries, a blink in geological time. Computer models suggest that this unleashed massive torrents of meltwater into the oceans, raising sea levels by as much as 120 metres. In India, this would have submerged the prehistoric coastlines of the Gulf of Cambay. precisely where sonar surveys now detect ancient structures beneath the sea. For archaeologists and mythologists alike, this overlap is compelling. The flood of Manu could be the folk memory of those vanished coastal civilizations, stories passed down by survivors who moved inland as their world drowned. Over generations, the rising tide became divine punishment, the boat became salvation, and the survivors became the seed of humanity's rebirth. The myth is not fantasy, it is history told in metaphor. There are even clues hidden in the Sanskrit itself. The word Manu shares roots with man and mind, suggesting the thinker or the progenitor. He is not just one man, but humanity personified, the collective memory of survival. And the fish that saves him, Matsya, is the first avatar of Vishnu, the preserver, the eternal principle that ensures continuity through destruction. In this way, Indian myth transforms catastrophe into cosmic order. The flood does not merely destroy, it resets the cycle, allowing creation to begin anew. Archaeological evidence supports that India's ancient coasts were repeatedly flooded. Off the shores of Tamil Nadu, at Pumpuar, divers from the National Institute of Oceanography found submerged stone structures and pottery dated to at least 7000 BCE. In Mahabalipuram, local legend speaks of 7 temples, 6 swallowed by the sea. During the 2004 tsunami, the retreating waves briefly exposed ancient walls and sculptures on the seabed, confirming that something indeed lies beneath. Science and myth meet again. If we connect these clues, the geological record, the submerged ruins, the flood stories, a picture forms of an ancient world swept away, its survivors encoding their experience in epic poetry. When the Rig Veda sings of rivers rushing to the ocean like mothers to their children, it may be recalling the same rising waters that erased the first shorelines of India. In that sense, the flood of Manu is not about divine wrath at all. It is an elegy for memory, for the cities that once gleamed where now only fish swim. To scientists, these myths serve as oral data, maps of where ancient people once lived, markers of past coastlines and climate events. To storytellers, they are proof of humanity's resilience. To listeners like us, they are the moment where geology and imagination become one. When we hear Manu's story today, we are hearing 2 voices, one of science, measuring sea level curves and isotopes, and one of myth, remembering through symbol and song. Both describe the same truth, that humanity has lived through world-ending floods before, and each time we began again. So perhaps the flood of Manu is more than a legend, it is a reminder that beneath every myth there is a memory, and beneath every memory a fact of survival. And somewhere between the mountains of the north and the drowned shores of the south, the first survivors of that cataclysm may have rebuilt, their stories becoming the blueprint of civilization itself. Along the coast of Gujarat, where the Arabian Sea breathes against India's western edge, the fishermen still speak of lights beneath the waves, faint glows seen on calm nights, where, they say, the ancient city of Dwarka once stood. For centuries, it was a legend, a city of gods built by Lord Krishna, described in the Mahabharata as a paradise of shining towers and marble palaces that vanished into the sea when its divine king departed the world. For a long time, historians called it a myth. But the sea, as always, hides its truths better than any storyteller. In 1983, the Marine Archaeology Unit of India's National Institute of Oceanography began systematic dives along the coast near the modern town of Dwarka. The expedition, led by archaeologist Dr. S.R. Rao, sought to explore the region mentioned in ancient Sanskrit texts. What they found changed everything. Just off the shore, beneath 20 to 36 feet of water, divers encountered rectangular foundations of dressed stone, walls aligned in grid patterns, and circular stone anchors, identical to those used by ancient mariners. Pottery fragments, tools, and coral-encrusted blocks were recovered. Evidence not of nature's play, but of human construction. Dr. Rao's team mapped the submerged structures over several seasons. They revealed a planned harbour complex with what appeared to be wharves, jetties, and fortified walls. Carbon dating of samples retrieved from the seabed, including wood and pottery, suggested dates ranging from 1500 to 2000 BCE, roughly contemporary with the late Harappan period. That already was surprising. But later surveys pushed the boundary even further. Offshore sonar imaging hinted at deeper ruins, older still, lying buried under layers of silt. In 2001, the National Institute of Ocean Technology used side-scan sonar in the Gulf of Cambay, further south, detecting geometric patterns stretching for several kilometres. Possible evidence that the coastline of Krishna's Dwarka was once part of a much larger civilization now lost beneath the sea. To the researchers, this convergence of archaeology and legend was astonishing. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as a city built in gold, its streets straight as arrows, its gates guarded by the sea. When Krishna left the mortal world, it says, the sea swallowed the city with a roar. The underwater ruins match this image almost poetically. Stone walls eroded but still standing, steps descending into sand where water now rules. Yet scientists caution against romantic conclusions. Marine archaeologists agree that a major ancient port city once thrived here, but whether it was Krishna's Dwarka or an earlier settlement of the same name remains uncertain. Coastal geomorphology shows that this region has been repeatedly inundated and uplifted by tectonic shifts and sea level rise since the end of the Ice Age. The current shoreline of Gujarat was once far inland. Over thousands of years, the sea advanced and retreated several times, erasing entire settlements each time it moved. Still, the archaeological pattern is undeniable. Onshore excavations at Bet Dwarka, an island 30 kilometres away, reveal layers of human occupation dating back to 1500 BCE and earlier, with pottery, beads and copper objects showing clear links to the Harappan tradition. The same distinctive triangular stone anchors found underwater appear here too, suggesting that these sites formed part of a continuous maritime network. India's west coast, it seems, was not the end of civilization, but its western highway, where traders once sailed to Oman, Bahrain, and Mesopotamia. The story of Dwarka's submergence, then, may not be mere myth, but collective memory of a real geological event. Around 3,500 years ago, studies show the sea level in this region rose rapidly due to a combination of monsoon intensification and crustal subsidence. Entire stretches of the Kathiawar coast were flooded. For those living here, the catastrophe would have appeared sudden, the ocean devouring their temples and homes. That trauma, told and retold, became the legend of the sea reclaiming the city of the gods. Modern technology has begun to illuminate what ancient poets once only described. Multi-beam sonar and sub-bottom profilers have mapped submerged structures resembling platforms, steps, and harbour basins. Underwater photography reveals quarried blocks fitted together with astonishing precision, now covered in coral. In some places, archaeologists have found pottery shards sealed in sediment, undisturbed since the city drowned. Remote sensing imagery from satellites confirms paleo shorelines extending miles beyond today's coast, proving that large tracts of land once existed where the sea now stretches. For believers, Dwarka is sacred proof that myth and history intertwine. Pilgrims still visit the modern city, where the Dwarkadish temple rises in devotion to Krishna, its spire a mirror to the one the waves may have claimed long ago. Every morning, the temple bells echo across the water as fishermen set sail, casting their nets over the ruins of their ancestors. Some bring up pieces of stone, pottery, or conch shell and leave them at the shrine as offerings to the city beneath the sea. Skeptics argue that much of the narrative is shaped by cultural desire, the yearning to find physical evidence for spiritual texts. Yet even the most cautious scientists admit that the convergence between epic description and physical geography is remarkable. The very name Dwarka means gateway, and perhaps that is what it truly is. A threshold between memory and matter, where myth begins to sound like geology. If we accept that the legend of Dwarka carries echoes of real events, then it becomes part of a larger pattern, the story of a civilization repeatedly erased by water and reborn inland. The Saraswati dried, Harappa fell silent, and Dwarka sank, each a different face of the same cycle of loss and renewal that defines India's ancient past. The sea that swallowed Dwarka is the same sea that preserved it. Beneath the waves, stone walls stand intact, protected from wind and time. Sonar beams reveal their outlines like ghosts caught in light. They are reminders that the line between myth and archaeology is thinner than we imagine, and that the ocean, patient and vast, may yet hold the oldest chapters of human history. In the heart of India's greatest epic, the Mahabharata, there are passages that feel less like mythology and more like something witnessed, as if someone, somewhere, had seen the impossible and tried to describe it with the only words they had. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, a warrior releases a weapon blazing like 10,000 suns, its fire consuming everything, men, chariots, even unborn children in the womb. The ground trembles, the wind burns, and the rivers boil. To ancient readers, this was divine wrath. To modernize, it sounds eerily like something else. A nuclear explosion. Let's begin carefully, with history, not speculation. The Mahabharata is among the world's longest poems, compiled between roughly 400 BCE and 400 CE, though its oral roots may stretch back 3,000 years or more. Its war, the conflict between the Pandavas and Kauravas, is mythic, not archaeological. Yet the language used to describe its celestial weapons, or astra, has drawn attention even from scientists. The most infamous is the Brahmastra, the weapon of the creator god Brahma. It strikes with a blinding flash, radiating heat that burns all living things, and leaves a wasteland where nothing can grow. These images, if stripped of their divine framing, sound shockingly familiar to modern physics. When the first atomic bomb detonated in July 1945, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project, quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He wasn't being poetic, he was haunted. He later told an interviewer that the verse had come to him unbidden as he watched the explosion's light. To him, the parallels were impossible to ignore, ancient words describing modern fire. But could such descriptions truly reflect some forgotten technology, or are they simply symbolic? Mainstream historians favour the latter. They argue that astra were spiritual concepts, metaphors for cosmic forces, not literal machines. The heat and light were poetry, not physics. Yet scattered archaeological findings keep the question alive. In the ruins of Mohenjo Daro, archaeologists once discovered skeletons lying unburied in the streets, their hands clasped as if in surprise. Some early reports claimed that a few of these bones carried traces of radioactivity higher than normal background levels, although later testing found no definitive evidence of nuclear exposure. The vitrified glass-like surfaces of some stones were also noted, but these can form naturally under intense fires or lightning strikes. So far, there is no scientific proof of ancient atomic weapons. Still, the imagery of blinding light and sudden annihilation refuses to fade. The Mahabharata speaks of other weapons too. The Agnyastra, the fire weapon, which produced a thick gloom and caused warriors' hair and nails to fall out. The Vajra, Indra's thunderbolt forged from celestial energy. And the Narayanastra, which unleashed a storm of fireballs that burned the earth as if the sun itself had fallen. Are these exaggerations of natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, or memories of something stranger? India's landscape bears marks of violent encounters with the heavens. In Maharashtra, the Sonar crater, nearly 2 kilometers wide, was formed by a meteor impact around 50,000 years ago, creating rocks fused into natural glass. Its circular form and magnetic anomalies have long fascinated scientists. To ancient peoples, such an event would have seemed divine, the sky throwing fire at the earth. Elsewhere, layers of high-temperature debris, known as tektites, are found across South Asia, evidence of other meteor strikes thousands of years ago. Perhaps these became the fire from heaven in memory's translation. Yet the technological imagery in the texts remains hauntingly specific. The Vimana Shastra, a later Sanskrit compendium describing flying machines, Vimanas, speaks of metals, fuels, and propulsion systems with names like Rajaloha and Mercury engines. Most scholars date this text to the 9th and 12th centuries CE and dismiss it as imaginative writing, but others point out that it draws from much older oral motifs in the Mahabharata and Ramayana, where flying chariots cross the sky roaring like thunder. Were these inspired by celestial phenomena or the inherited echoes of something seen before history began? Modern physicists and Sanskritists often meet in this uneasy space, one arguing for metaphor, the other for memory. Perhaps both are right. Catastrophes can echo through generations. A comet breaking apart in the sky, a meteor impact, or even a massive volcanic eruption would leave survivors struggling to describe light brighter than the sun, fire from the heavens, or clouds that poisoned the land. Over millennia, those images could evolve into divine warfare, humans turning disaster into meaning. This connection between myth and cosmic events isn't unique to India. The Bible's destruction of Sodom, the Norse Ragnarok, and the Chinese records of fire falling from the sky all preserve similar imagery. Across the globe, early civilizations seem to remember an age when the heavens themselves struck the earth. Whether through comets, impacts, or solar storms, the cosmos has indeed scarred our planet many times, and humanity's memory may have recorded those scars as myth. In this light, the Mahabharata may not be describing technology at all, but cataclysm, the kind that ends civilizations. When the epic speaks of smoke covering the earth for days, it could mirror the environmental effects of large volcanic eruptions like Toba in Sumatra, whose ash covered India 74,000 years ago. The description of poisoned skies and dying vegetation could correspond to the aftermath of real-world catastrophes that later storytellers recast as the fury of gods. But the symbolism runs deeper still. The Brahmastra was said to be used only once, and even its wielder was warned of its consequences. Its unleashing broke cosmic order, dharma, and the world itself recoiled. In that sense, the myth anticipates a truth humanity would rediscover only in the 20th century, that power without restraint destroys the very world it seeks to defend. When Oppenheimer quoted the Gita, he wasn't proving ancient technology. He was realizing that the wisdom of restraint, the terror of misuse, had already been written long ago. The ancients might not have built atomic bombs, but they understood the moral weight of such fire. The Mahabharata isn't a prophecy of science, it's a warning about the human heart. And yet one question lingers like smoke. Why do so many myths, across so many cultures, describe the same blinding flash, the same fire from heaven? Maybe memory and metaphor are not opposites, but allies. Perhaps the old poets weren't imagining the future. They were remembering the past, encoding in verse what their ancestors had once seen when the sky itself burned. As the echoes of that ancient fire fade, we follow them into silence, into the aftermath of war, where even the brightest flame eventually turns to dust. For after the fire, the earth must learn to heal, and that healing, as we will see, would shape the fate of the Indus cities themselves. The end of a civilization rarely comes with a single event. It happens quietly, a slow unraveling of balance. In the ancient world, that unraveling often began with water. The same rivers that had nurtured humanity's first great cities eventually betrayed them. In India, it was the dying of the Saraswati and the rising of the sea that turned the Indus Valley civilization into dust. Around 2000 BCE, the world's climate began to shift. The monsoons weakened, rainfall grew erratic, and the glaciers feeding northern India's rivers started to retreat. What had been a network of life-giving streams turned into wandering channels of mud. Geological cores taken from beneath the Thar Desert show layers of dried riverbeds, once mighty torrents now reduced to trickles. Satellite imagery confirms what the Rig Veda once lamented. The Saraswati, mighty among the mighty, had become a ghost. The loss of the river was more than environmental. It was existential. Along its banks had stretched hundreds of towns, Kalibangan, Banawali, Rakigarhi, each thriving on fertile soil and abundant trade. As the river dwindled, the wells turned brackish, crops failed, and people began to move. Excavations at Harappan sites show signs of sudden abandonment. Houses left half-finished, pottery scattered, grain storage left unused. Families appear to have packed what they could and migrated east toward the Ganges basin, seeking water and survival. The civilization did not collapse overnight. It shifted, dispersing its people like silt carried on the wind. While the rivers dried, the sea was rising. Global studies show that between 5000 and 2000 BCE, the Arabian Sea crept steadily inland. In Gujarat, sediment analysis reveals multiple layers of marine transgression, each marking a time when the ocean advanced and then receded again. What had once been coastal plains became estuaries. What had been harbours became seabeds. The city of Dwarka, as we have seen, was one such casualty, a port swallowed by the tide. The same story unfolded on India's eastern coast, where ancient ports like Pumpuhar and Mahabalipuram vanished beneath the Bay of Bengal. These were not isolated tragedies, but part of a planetary shift that redefined shorelines from Egypt to Japan. To visualize this world in transformation, imagine a map of South Asia at the end of the Ice Age. The coastline extended far beyond today's limits, forming a broad continental shelf now hidden underwater. Rivers such as the Indus, Narmada, and Saraswati carved deep valleys across this land. As the glaciers melted, the ocean filled those valleys, creating the modern gulfs and estuaries we know today. For the people living there, the sea's rise would have seemed like divine wrath, a flood creeping year after year, claiming villages, fields, and temples. No wonder so many of India's myths speak of water reclaiming what once belonged to it. At the same time, new scientific tools allow us to read this ancient disaster in stunning detail. Sediment cores extracted from the Arabian Sea reveal distinct black bands rich in organic carbon, the signature of massive floods that carried soil and vegetation from drowned lands. Pollen analysis shows a dramatic decline in wetland plants and an increase in desert species around 1900 BCE. The Earth's climate was drying, its seas swelling, a double blow to societies dependent on the delicate rhythm of rain and river. Archaeologists see this change written directly into the ruins. In Mohenjo Daro, alternating layers of clay and silt indicate repeated flooding, followed by long periods of drought. Streets once swept clean were buried under mud. Wells ran dry. Trade seals stop appearing after this period. It is as if the civilization's breath had simply slowed until it stopped. But what looks like collapse in the soil may have felt, to those who lived through it, like migration and renewal. The Harappans did not vanish, they adapted. Some became farmers in the Gangetic Plains, others traders in the Deccan, their cultural DNA absorbed into later Indian societies. In that sense, the Indus world never truly ended. It transformed. Even so, the trauma of loss left deep marks in memory. The Mahabharata speaks of kingdoms destroyed by drought, of rivers turning to dust. The Puranas recall oceans rising and lands sinking, echoing geological reality with mythic precision. Modern oceanographers confirm that around 3,800 years ago, a major regional sea level fluctuation reshaped India's western coastline. Coral dating near Dwarka shows that the sea advanced roughly 2 meters in a century, enough to erase entire settlements. For generations, survivors must have watched the water claim their ancestors' cities, their prayers growing louder as the tides rose higher. And yet, every end births something new. From the ruins of the Indus came new cultures: the Vedic, the Chalcolithic farmers of the Ganges, the seafaring traders who carried India's goods to Arabia and Africa. The loss of one world seeded another. India's civilization did not vanish. It retreated, adapted, and found balance again. The same spirit that built Harappa learned to survive in monsoon villages and mountain valleys. Science today allows us to reconstruct this vanished landscape. With LiDAR scanning, bathymetric mapping, and paleohydrological modelling, researchers can now trace the exact course of extinct rivers beneath the desert and draw coastlines as they looked 10,000 years ago. In these reconstructions, India's northwest appears as a green corridor of rivers flowing to a far-distant sea, a vision that matches perfectly the geography described in the Rig Veda. What poets once called the 7 rivers, scientists can now map with astonishing precision. Myth, it seems, has been telling us the truth all along, only in another language. As we stand on these ancient floodplains today, we see not ruins, but continuity. Cities buried beneath cities, stories written atop older ones. The rivers may have died, but their people endured. And the sea that once destroyed now guards their memory, sealing it beneath layers of coral and time. Perhaps that is the real lesson of the Indus world, that civilization is not a monument, but a cycle. Water gives life, then takes it back, only to give again. The same pattern that drowned the first cities now shapes our coasts once more. Modern satellites trace the same rising tides that once erased Dwarka. Climate change, which ended one world, whispers warnings to ours. As we look out across the restless Arabian Sea, the horizon seems to blur between past and future. The story of the vanishing world is not finished, it is repeating, and like those who lived before the flood, we stand again at the edge of water, wondering what the next tide will bring. When you hold one of the tiny seals from the ruins of Harappa or Mohenjo Daro, it feels impossibly light, a square no larger than a postage stamp, carved from smooth steatite, polished until it gleams. Yet pressed onto its surface are symbols that have resisted every attempt at understanding for more than a century. A few straight lines, a curve, an animal, perhaps a bull, a tiger, or a unicorn, and above it a row of strange marks, sometimes only 4 or 5, arranged in an order that suggests a language. But no one can read them. The Indus script, as we call it today, remains one of humanity's greatest unsolved codes, a civilization's voice caught forever in silence. Archaeologists have found over 4,000 examples of these inscriptions on seals, tablets, copper plates, and pottery fragments. Most are short, the longest contain just 26 symbols, but their repetition and structure suggest a written system, not mere decoration. Each sign seems deliberate, carved with care and precision. Their economy of form, their rhythm, and the way they recur across a vast region from Pakistan to Gujarat reveal the presence of a shared grammar, a unifying idea of order that transcended distance. The first seals were discovered in the 1920s by Sir John Marshall, who realized that they belonged to a civilization as advanced as Egypt or Sumer. He sent the inscriptions to linguists across the world. Many tried to read them using known ancient languages, Sumerian, Elamite, even Proto-Dravidian, but none fit perfectly. The symbols bore no clear resemblance to any other script. There was no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text to serve as a key. The language of the Indus people remained locked behind symbols that refused to yield. Some researchers argue that the script represents an early Dravidian language, ancestral to Tamil and other South Indian tongues. Their reasoning comes from recurring signs that might indicate grammatical endings or number markers similar to Dravidian structure. Others suggest the language could have been Proto-Sanskritic, an early branch of the Indo-European family. But both theories face the same obstacle. Without longer texts, statistical patterns alone cannot confirm meaning. The inscriptions are tantalizingly brief, like fragments of thought frozen in stone. In the 1970s, Indian scholar Asko Parpola began a systematic catalogue of every known sign, identifying about 400 unique symbols, too few for a logographic system like Chinese, too many for an alphabet. He proposed that the script was a combination of both, a rebus-based writing where symbols stood for syllables or ideas, similar to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Some signs appear to depict fish, leaves, or tools, perhaps shorthand for words. For example, the fish symbol might represent the word for star, as in Dravidian languages where the two words sound alike. This kind of wordplay, or rebus principle, might hide the key to the code. But every solution so far unlocks only more questions. In recent decades, computer scientists and linguists have joined the search. Using AI pattern recognition, teams at the Indian Institute of Technology and the University of Washington have analysed thousands of seal inscriptions. Their models show that the symbols follow a predictable sequence, statistically similar to natural human languages rather than random marks. Certain signs almost always appear at the beginning or end, suggesting syntax, perhaps prefixes or suffixes or titles before names. These digital studies prove that the script encodes language, not mere religious iconography. Yet what that language says remains hidden. What we do know paints an image of remarkable organisation. Seals were not art for its own sake. They were tools of administration and trade. Many were found in warehouses, granaries, and docks, used to stamp goods, seal documents, or mark ownership. Their presence in Mesopotamia, at sites like Ur and Lagash, shows that Indus merchants traded across oceans. Some seals even depict ships with masts and oars, suggesting a maritime culture fluent in navigation and record-keeping. The script, therefore, was not ceremonial. It was functional, part of the machinery of civilization. Beyond commerce, the seals carry powerful spiritual imagery. One famous example, the Pashupati seal, shows a horned figure seated cross-legged among animals, an image scholars associate with Shiva, the lord of beasts. This continuity between Harappan symbols and later Hindu iconography suggests that cultural memory survived long after the cities fell. Perhaps the Indus script recorded hymns, rituals, or myths that later evolved into the verses of the Rig Veda. If so, decoding it would bridge India's prehistoric and historic ages, revealing how philosophy emerged from the geometry of the Harappan mind. But why did this writing disappear? Around 1900 BCE, as rivers shifted and cities declined, the seals stopped appearing. The script vanished completely, replaced centuries later by the early Brahmi letters of Ashoka's inscriptions. No culture directly inherited it. This abrupt silence is one of archaeology's great enigmas. Usually writing evolves, changing shape over time. Here, it was as if someone had switched off a language overnight. The reason may lie in the environmental collapse that scattered the Indus people. Without centralized trade or administration, writing lost its purpose. The symbols fell out of use, their meanings fading with the last scribes who carved them. And yet fragments of that old world view may live on in ways we barely recognize. The obsession with measurement and symmetry that defined Harappan design continued in later Indian architecture. The sanctity of water, the centrality of order, the meditative stillness of the seated figure, these motifs flow unbroken from the seals to the temples, from clay to stone. Even if the language died, its ideas endured. Today, researchers continue to search for a breakthrough. Every few years, a new claim of decipherment makes headlines, only to collapse under scrutiny. Some say the script hides a proto-Vedic hymn, others that it is a numerical ledger of goods. None has yet convinced the scholarly world. The Indus problem, as linguists call it, remains open, the last great unsolved code of the ancient world. To look at one of these seals through a microscope is to feel the closeness of another mind, the pressure of a tool, the curve of a hand steady with purpose. Each mark once carried meaning, once made sense to someone. The people who carved them had laws, poetry, mathematics, faith. We can still touch what they made, but not what they meant. And so, the script stands as both triumph and tragedy, a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can lose their voice. Perhaps one day, buried beneath layers of desert or coral, a bilingual inscription will emerge. A single artifact to open the gate between silence and speech. Until then, the seals wait patiently in museum cases and seabeds alike, their tiny signs gleaming under the light, the undeciphered heartbeat of a civilization that once spoke in perfect order. For centuries, the story of civilization was told as if it began in one place, between the Tigris and Euphrates, where writing and city walls first rose from the mud. But the deeper science looks, the more that map begins to shift. In the quiet precision of genetics, in the patterns of trade routes buried beneath dunes, and in the alignments of ancient temples pointing toward the stars, another picture of humanity's dawn is emerging, one that places India not at the edge of history, but near its centre. Let us begin not with ruins, but with blood. Within every human cell lies a record of journeys, a genetic diary written in DNA. Over the past 2 decades, ancient genome studies have traced how populations moved across continents after leaving Africa around 70,000 years ago. One of the earliest major settlement zones outside Africa appears along the southern coast of India. The genetic lineages of South Asian hunter-gatherers show continuity stretching back tens of millennia, predating any known civilization. These people were not migrants passing through. They were builders of foundations. Modern genetic research divides India's ancestry into 2 deep roots: the ancient ancestral South Indians, who descend from those earliest settlers, and the Indus Valley-related peoples, whose genes spread both eastward and westward. Studies published in Cell and Science, 2019 to 2022, reveal that DNA from Indus Valley sites like Rakhigarhi shares affinity with populations in Iran, Central Asia, and even Mesopotamia. This suggests a web of movement and exchange, not invasion, but connection. Ideas, goods, and genes flowed both ways. The cradle of civilization may have had more than one cradle, and India was one of them. Archaeology supports this genetic story. Excavations at Mehrgarh, a site in Balochistan older than the Indus cities, reveal early farming communities as far back as 7000 BCE, among the world's first. Here, people domesticated barley, wheat, and cattle centuries before the rise of Sumer. They built mud brick houses, used dental drills made of flint, and crafted ornaments from turquoise and lapis lazuli. The continuity from Mehrgarh to Harappa shows a native evolution, not a borrowed spark. Civilization in India did not arrive from elsewhere, it germinated in its own soil. Meanwhile, the sky itself offers another kind of evidence, one written in light. The hymns of the Rig Veda describe constellations, solstices, and star risings with remarkable accuracy. Astronomers have reconstructed these celestial references to date the composition of some Vedic verses to around 4000 to 6000 BCE, when certain stars, such as the Pleiades, rose due east. At the site of Dholavira, on the island of Kadir, the city's streets and reservoirs align precisely to the cardinal directions, mirroring solar and lunar geometry. Temples like Konark and Udayagiri, built millennia later, continue this cosmic tradition. Architecture as astronomy, stone as calendar. These alignments suggest an ancient awareness of the heavens long before the Babylonians recorded their first star charts. Trade, too, was a language that connected worlds. In the harbours of Lothal, archaeologists uncovered a massive dockyard built of kiln-fired bricks, one of the earliest known in the world. Its basin, 214 metres long, once held ships that sailed the Arabian Sea. Terracotta models show vessels with high prows and cabins, capable of long-distance voyages. In the ruins, archaeologists found beads of carnelian, agate, and lapis lazuli, stones that have also been excavated in Sumerian cities like Ur and Lagash. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia record merchants from a far-off land called Meluha, who brought wood, ivory, and gold in exchange for silver and wool. Most scholars now agree that Meluha was the Indus region. These were not isolated worlds. They were neighbours in trade, partners in the first global economy. Genetic traces confirm this maritime connection. DNA samples from Bronze Age skeletons in Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula show minor but detectable South Asian components, hinting at intermarriage between traders and local populations. The same genetic signal moves eastward into Southeast Asia, carried by seafarers and merchants who spread rice, spices, and metallurgy across the Indian Ocean. By the time Egypt was carving hieroglyphs, India's coasts were already whispering across oceans. Science continues to illuminate these connections. Isotopic analysis of Harappan human teeth reveals that many individuals consumed water from regions hundreds of kilometers apart, evidence of mobility and trade networks that linked far-flung cities. Metallurgical studies show that copper used in Mesopotamia contains trace elements matching ores from India's Aravalli Hills. Even the humble cotton fibre, first domesticated in the Indus region around 5000 BCE, travelled west, eventually clothing the ancient world. All these discoveries converge on a single truth. The Indus civilization was not an isolated miracle, but part of a living web that shaped humanity's shared destiny. Its genetic imprint threads through Asia and Europe. Its astronomical wisdom echoes in later calendars. Its trade routes foreshadowed the Silk Road. The more data we gather, the clearer the pattern becomes. Civilization was never linear. It was cyclical, overlapping, and deeply interconnected. But these echoes are not only scientific, they are philosophical. The Vedic view of the cosmos, of time as a repeating cycle rather than a straight line, may have arisen from watching these very patterns of migration and renewal. The people of ancient India saw that the stars return to their place after long seasons, just as rivers flood and recede. They understood that what dies is reborn, and what travels outward eventually returns home. Science now affirms what their metaphysics once intuited, that everything, from genes to galaxies, moves in cycles. Modern researchers continue to test these insights with tools of breathtaking precision. Genome sequencing, satellite mapping, and geochemical fingerprinting allow us to follow the ancient trade winds and bloodlines that once connected the Indus world to the rest of humanity. Each new discovery brings us closer to seeing that India was not a recipient of civilization, it was one of its architects. If we could overlay all these layers, DNA migrations, ancient trade maps, star alignments, we would see a single pattern glowing across time, a vast network radiating from the subcontinent, carrying ideas, goods, and genes outward like ripples on a cosmic sea. India's story is not a forgotten corner of prehistory. It is the central note in the symphony of human beginnings. And as we trace those ripples through science and sky, we arrive at a realization that echoes through every discovery so far, that perhaps the story of civilization didn't begin in one place, but everywhere the stars reflected on water and people dared to measure the heavens and call it home. Time, to most of the world, is an arrow. It flies forward, from creation to collapse, from past to future. But in ancient India, time was never a line. It was a wheel, vast, cosmic, turning endlessly through creation, preservation, and destruction. The sages called it Kala Chakra, the wheel of time. To them, nothing in existence was truly new or lost. Everything was part of a rhythm so immense that even the rise and fall of civilizations were only the pulse of a greater heartbeat. This concept of cyclical time lies at the center of India's oldest philosophy. In the Mahabharata and Puranas, the universe moves through repeating epochs called yugas: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, the age of decline in which we now live. Each yuga diminishes in moral and spiritual strength. The first lasts for 1.7 million years, the last for just over 400,000. When the cycle ends, the universe dissolves in flame or flood, only to be born again. What Western science calls entropy, Indian cosmology calls renewal. For millennia, this cyclical worldview shaped how Indians understood not only the cosmos, but history itself. Where other civilizations sought to record and preserve, India sought to remember through repetition. The myths of flood and fire were not one-time events. They were reminders that destruction and creation are inseparable. When the Saraswati dried, when Dwarka sank, when the Indus cities fell silent, these were not the end of civilization. They were turns of the wheel. Modern scientists, working far from the temples and scriptures, are finding patterns that seem to echo this ancient insight. Geological and climatic records reveal that Earth's history is not linear either. It moves in cycles. Every 11,700 years, our planet enters a new phase of the Milankovitch cycles, shifts in Earth's orbit and axial tilt that trigger ice ages and warm periods. Solar activity too follows rhythmic pulses. The 11-year sunspot cycle, the 2,300-year Hallstatt cycle, and even longer patterns that bring climate upheavals roughly every 12,000 years, the same number found again and again in ancient myths. Scientists see data, the ancients saw destiny, but both describe the same thing: a world that breathes. Even the great civilizations follow this pulse. Archaeological evidence shows that complex societies rise, flourish, and decline at regular intervals, roughly every 2,000 to 3,000 years. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, the fall of Rome, the dynastic shifts of China, all seem to move in waves. The ancients in India already knew this. Their texts speak of cycles within cycles, of smaller manvantaras and mahayugas nested like gears in a clock too vast to imagine. What physics now calls fractal time, India had already intuited through meditation and myth. At Konark, the 13th century sun temple in Odisha, this philosophy is carved in stone. The temple itself is a colossal chariot of the sun god, Surya, drawn by 7 horses, its wheels serving as both decoration and functional sundials. As sunlight passes across the spokes, it marks the hours of the day, time measured through motion, through cycles. In ancient observatories like Ujjain and Jaipur's Jantar Mantar, time was not counted by clocks, but by shadow and starlight, tied directly to the rhythm of the heavens. This harmony between cosmic and human time runs deep in Indian thought. To understand the universe was to synchronize with its cycles. The concept of cyclical time also shaped India's understanding of rebirth, samsara. Just as the cosmos is reborn, so is the soul. Death is not an end but a transition, a change of form. The goal is not to escape time but to transcend it, to achieve moksha, liberation from the endless turning of the wheel. It is a philosophy that refuses despair, for even decay has meaning, even darkness is part of the dawn. Modern cosmology, in its own way, is beginning to converge on similar ideas. Theories of a cyclic universe, Big Bang followed by Big Crunch or Big Bounce, propose that the cosmos itself might die and be reborn eternally. Each expansion and collapse could create new universes, just as Hindu philosophy describes Brahma creating and dissolving worlds at the beginning and end of each cosmic day. What Indian sages once envisioned through contemplation, science is now exploring through mathematics. The same cyclical rhythm appears in the sky. The precession of the equinoxes, Earth's slow wobble on its axis, completes a rotation roughly every 25,800 years. Ancient astronomers may have known this. The Yuga cycle of 24,000 years described in some Vedic interpretations mirrors this motion almost exactly. The heavens themselves mark time not as progress, but as return. The stars that rise tonight will rise again in the same place, long after we are gone. This sense of eternal recurrence profoundly influenced India's art, architecture, and literature. Temple blueprints follow geometric ratios that repeat infinitely, like fractals, from the smallest shrine to the cosmic diagram of mandalas. Music, too, flows in repeating cycles of rhythm and melody, returning again and again to the same note. A sound made circular. Even storytelling mirrors this design. Epics begin with the end and end with a beginning, reminding the listener that the journey never truly stops. From a modern perspective, this worldview offers a kind of ecological wisdom. If time is circular, then destruction is not license but warning. Every action will return, in climate, in history, in consequence. The idea of karma is simply cyclical causality applied to moral life. The ancients understood that humanity is not above the pattern. We are within it. To live out of balance with nature is to turn the wheel faster toward our own undoing. The ocean remembers what the land forgets. Beneath its surface, time lies perfectly still. Temples half buried in coral, streets paved in silt, walls draped in silence. The sea does not decay, it preserves. And somewhere below the blue shimmer of the Arabian Sea, the first chapters of our story still rest unread. The Gulf of Cambay, where our journey began, remains one of the least explored archaeological frontiers on Earth. The currents are fierce, the water opaque, yet sonar keeps whispering of shapes that should not be there. Symmetrical grids, long avenues, right angles that resist the chaos of nature. Each new survey adds a faint line to the map, as if the sea itself were slowly surrendering a secret. Divers bring up beads, tools, and shards of pottery still carrying the scent of fire, the fingerprints of a civilization that might have risen and fallen before history began. If the dating of these finds proves true, it would mean that India's coastlines held organized settlements while Mesopotamia was still wilderness. The story of civilization would have to begin anew, not between the Tigris and Euphrates, but along the Saraswati and the sea. India's rivers and shores, once joined in abundance, might have formed the true cradle of humanity's first cities, places of order, trade, and spirit, erased not by conquest but by water. The sea, however, is patient. It guards what it takes, holding ruins like pages pressed together by weight and time. Scientists scanning the seabed often speak of a strange feeling, as if they are moving through a library whose shelves are sealed in darkness. Each coral-covered stone, each broken amphora is a word. Together they form a language older than any script, a dialogue between human hands and the earth that shaped them. But even silence has its own pulse. The more we learn, the more the fragments begin to connect. The drowned coasts, the vanished river, the undeciphered seals, the myths of flood and fire, the cosmic cycles that foretell destruction and rebirth. It all spirals back to the same pattern, a forgotten dawn that flared and faded long before Sumer or Egypt were born. What we call the beginning of civilization may only be the latest sunrise in a long succession of forgotten mornings. Perhaps that is why the Indian imagination still speaks in cycles, why time itself is seen as rhythm rather than line. The people who first built by the sea may have watched it rise, seen their temples vanish, and understood that nothing endures but renewal. When they sang of Manu's flood or Krishna's drowned city, they were not inventing, they were remembering. And when their descendants carved the Yuga cycles into stone and verse, they were not predicting, they were echoing a pattern already lived. If we could descend far enough into those waters, if we could brush the sand from those ancient foundations, we might find that humanity's first blueprint for civilization was drawn here, in India's coastal light, beneath skies mapped by the earliest astronomers, beside rivers now turned to dust. We might find that the world's oldest myths are not metaphors, but field notes of a world reborn after catastrophe. Yet the ocean will not give up its knowledge easily. It waits, calm and endless, guarding the threshold between memory and oblivion. And so, for now, the story remains half told, its pages drifting beneath the waves, its echoes rising in prayer and song. But the rhythm persists, water rising, time returning, the wheel turning once more. When we began, we descended into silence. Now at the end, that silence feels different. Not absence, but promise. Somewhere in the deep, the stones still glow faintly beneath the silt, like embers in the ashes of time. They wait for the day when light will touch them again. And if that day comes, when the first civilization of humanity finally rises from India's seas, perhaps we will understand that we were never discovering something new, only remembering something very old. If you've listened this far, thank you for journeying through these depths with me. Leave a light, a like, so I'll know you're here among the echoes. Until we meet again, may the tides carry your thoughts gently into the next mystery.